This episode of the KrakCast is brought to you by our friends at BigDoor24.pl. It's a new service that not only matches expats with local property experts who speak their language, but it gives you cash-back discounts on successful credit applications. So go to BigDoor24.pl. That's BigDoor24.pl. Find out all the information you need to get the mortgage you want. Again, BigDoor24.pl. Make sure you use the special promo code KrakCast to get a great cashback offer. And now, on with the show. Okay, so you've seen the name of this episode when you clicked on it. A bit of a interesting thing that came up in the news this week when the official Twitter account at Auschwitz, the Museum Auschwitz, they posted, I'll read it to you. It says, when you come to the Auschwitz Museum, remember you're at the site where over 1 million people were killed. Respect their memory. There are better places to learn how to walk on a balance beam than the site which symbolizes deportation of hundreds of thousands to their deaths. And the post was accompanied by a number of photographs of people using the entry railway at Birkenau, well, as a balance beam, and kind of lighthearted. A couple of people are smiling in the pictures and whatnot, and created a bit of a media firestorm because it put a light on the behavior of people at Auschwitz and the subject of taking pictures and selfies, and how do you balance that against the respect that you're supposed to show at a place like Auschwitz and whatnot. It's an interesting subject. I'm not sure if there are any right or wrong answers, but let's go around the room and get general impressions here. Dr. Mike, you want to start us off?
I mean, yeah, I have to agree with the museum here. This isn't a place to be playing around or taking selfies. I remember a couple of, maybe 10 years ago, there was a picture of a girl. She took a picture and made it into a profile picture of her getting into the crematory oven. And just sitting there in shorts, 16 or something like that, smiling and taking a photo. And that just didn't sit right with a lot of people, and I think rightfully so. The museum here doesn't have any force to power to enforce this, to kick people out or anything like that. But, they should remind people that, this is a memorial, this is a graveyard, this is a site of, one of the greatest human tragedies in history. And, treated accordingly, in memory of the people that died, and, to understand, the concept of what happened here. It's a huge, huge event, and, not a place to play around with.
Josh?
Well, I think I would probably use the analogy of, behavior appropriate to the place where you are. There are plenty of people who have no religious feelings whatsoever. However, from time to time, they will find themselves inside a church, say when a friend or a family member is getting married, and generally the behaviour inside church, apart from when you're invited to sing or join in the call and responses, is to be quiet and listen to what the priest or the vicar or whoever is saying. And this is generally understood, and it's clearly understood. And of course, you do get the situation when very, very, very small children start crying, and then this is tolerated to a degree, and if the child won't stop crying, then usually the mother will take it outside, and this is kind of okay. That we don't expect small babies to understand the rules for behaviour in church. So I'm kind of tempted to extrapolate a little bit here. I mean, I think one of the issues is you do get large coach parties of school children, teenage school children, from not just from Poland, but I mean particularly from Germany, actually, and also from other European countries. And teenage children are not bound by their consciences in terms of how to behave. They may find the whole exercise a bit boring. They may find the exercise, the visiting the concentration camp, to be something that is, kind of interesting, but their attention span is not so great. So after a while, you kind of yeah. And, especially if the sun is shining and I don't know, all this and that. So I can kind of get why they do it. Well, we part of the problem that arises because we have this modern phenomena of social media, and everyone has a camera. They can take a picture of themselves. And so kind of, juvenile hijinks that maybe teacher would say look, listen, you guys, don't do that because it's not really appropriate for a place like this. doesn't just stay within a small group. It is now kind of, disseminated around the world and, retweeted and all the rest of it. So I have a lot of sympathy for Auschwitz's position on this, because I do think it's disrespectful. But at the same time, people teenage children are not horrible. They often do things that don't come across well simply because nobody pointed out to them that it's not the right kind of behavior. I
mean, you're still learning social skills. And to continue with what you're saying, I can understand a young person there walking around and without even thinking about starting to walk down the rail tracks like as a balancing beam. I mean, I can understand, you say something to your friends, you laugh because you've been there all day, but it's a step up then to take a photo of yourself doing this and then post it to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you're smart enough to take a photo like that of you doing something like that to a social media platform, you should be smart enough to know that that's not appropriate either. Acting a little immature is normal, but then actually posting this immaturity is a little bit too far. I mean, especially if we're talking about a site like Auschwitz.
Posting it, and in addition to these pictures that Auschwitz posted that were connected with or attached to the Twitter posting, I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have seen as well, and people listening have seen on Facebook, other pictures taken at Auschwitz that are clearly in bad taste. Selfies at the main entrance, selfies in the crematoria. The I don't know what it's called, that picture where people jump up into the air and they take the pic at the highest point in the jump, that kind of thing. When they're at Birkenau, stuff you shouldn't be doing there. And so this was an issue before Auschwitz, the museum posted about it. Maybe it kind of reached it reached the right person in the organization there, or got their attention, or there were enough examples of it on the internet or on Facebook that got their attention. They felt they had to say something about it. But Josh, to your point, and I agree, I sympathize with their request that people, behave themselves. Auschwitz as a museum, they have a recommended policy. It's not enforced, but it's recommended that people under the age of 14 not go there, because they conclude, I think correctly, that emotionally, intellectually, they're not able to understand where they are and to behave themselves accordingly, okay? But in the pictures that we see, the pictures attached to the Auschwitz's Twitter post, for example, these people are not 14 or even close to 14. These people are in their 20s, maybe a little older even. And so clearly there are people who are legally adults, but still cannot really internalize the reality of where they are and again behave themselves accordingly. So what are you going to do? I mean, how do you combat this? They can say, look, please, only 14 and over, please behave yourselves accordingly. Please don't do this. And they can do this all they want, but there are some people that just won't be reached by this kind of communication, this kind of request, and they're going to continue to do these things forever.
Well, I think, that's a very good point, and I kind of deliberately held back from pointing out the actual ages of many of the examples that are given, because yes, these are adults, and I think some of the on the Twitter feed, some of the responses kind of in defence of these people's actions and criticising the Auschwitz Museum's kind of stance.
Yeah, that's right. It's like give them a break, basically.
They're just expressing themselves.
Right.
It's I'm sorry. This is.
No sympathy for the people telling Auschwitz to lighten up a little bit?
Oh, no, not really.
Auschwitz should not be lightening up. That's
I mean, as a general rule, as someone who is not an Auschwitz person, to say, show a degree of kind of understanding that, these people aren't intentionally necessarily being disrespectful. But that's me as an outsider. That's you or Mike as an outsider. But the museum authorities, I think, just in the same as if you are, the custodian of your church, you're the priest or whatever, and you say kind of like, no, do not kind of go balancing on pews and taking selfies in the middle of, a mass or whatever. Especially if you're like in your mid-20s or older.
I got to say something that's going to seem a little bit odd, maybe shocking to somebody who's never been to Auschwitz and not familiar with it. But the reality is that Auschwitz is a tourist destination. And maybe it doesn't sound right to put it in those terms. And of course, it isn't a conventional tourist destination. It's unique. There's nothing else like it. We all know that. But I forgot the exact number, but it's something, 2 million people a year are going there, right? There's a whole infrastructure there to accommodate them. And there's parking lots and toilet facilities and gift shops and restaurants and cafes. And it's unsettling and jarring to a lot of people who are going there for the first time and weren't expecting this, right? And when you have 2 million people going there, you're going to have a substantial number of people, even if it's 10%, that's 200,000 people, a substantial number of people going there simply because everybody else is going. They have no real intellectual or emotional interest in it. This is something to do typically while they're visiting Krakow. I've been there, and maybe you guys have seen this too. I've been there. I've seen stag do's, probably English. I'm not picking on England. I like England, but this happened to be English stag do's at Auschwitz. Now, does that sound like a stag do thing to do?
No,
Not
it doesn't.
really,
No.
but they went because they had a free afternoon. It's something to do.
They want to say they're being quote unquote culture, that they're seeing the important sites as well.
During their stay. Okay, I get that. But a lot of people, my point is, a lot of people go there and they're not really interested in the historical, social, cultural, religious, etc. significance of the place. It's simply a place to go. And because of that, they're easily distracted. Get bored, and they pull out the phone, and the next thing you know, they're taking selfies in places they clearly should not be taking selfies, or any pictures at all, really. I don't know. But does this make any sense, Josh?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I think, of course, what could happen and what they could do, which is what a number of kind of historical or much visited sites do, is that photography is just not allowed at all. And that, if you want pictures, then you have to buy them from the souvenir shop. And so,
tough to enforce.
It is, especially with the camera phones and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you Google this, I don't know what the appropriate term would be, but inappropriate pictures at Auschwitz, and you'll get lots and lots of pictures of people who just way over the line. And again, they're not teenagers; these are adults, people who should know better. And it's even to add another layer of weirdness to this. You'll find it has to be said. A lot of those pictures taken by Israeli groups. Jewish groups that go to Auschwitz, and teenagers. Right, yeah. You do see this a lot, and you're just thinking, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? What are you doing? But it happens a lot. So it seems that all kinds of people don't know how to behave themselves. Let me turn this around. Let's take a devil's advocate position on this, because Josh, you mentioned the comments that were posted on the Twitter feed. Several people kind of in defense of these pictures, lighten up, people just kind of relaxing. Again, devil's advocate position. Maybe this is just how some people deal with the incredible emotional weight of what they experience there. This is how they react. The lighter side of things, showing that, you can still have normal human emotions even in a place like that. Somehow, Auschwitz has not crushed the human spirit, and you can still be happy and carefree even there. Is there anything to this? I mean, could that potentially kind of sort of be used as an excuse or an explanation?
Well, I think in the sense that, you've just kind of done your trip around Auschwitz and Auschwitz to Birkenau, and it's been all pretty harrowing, and the sun is shining, and you're part of a bigger group that is reconstituting outside the gates of Birkenau, and you kind of jump up on the railway track and just balance your way along it, and it's kind of like letting things go. Yeah, I can't see any problem with that. Where I do draw the line a little bit, I think, is the idea of let's take a picture of this and make sure that anybody in the world...
Hashtag sunny day or something like that.
Yeah, that's the, there's the behavior, let
me read this to you.
If you're balancing on a railway track in the woods and nobody watching,
Let me interrupt here. Let me read this to you. Now, this is a comment that was posted on Auschwitz's Twitter post. Someone commented in response. And he plays a very powerful card, and you'll understand when I get to it. He plays a very powerful card in his answer. He said, I'm quoting here, "I have visited Auschwitz with my children. My mother was a Holocaust survivor. Many of her family perished. I think this tweet, Auschwitz's tweet, is unworthy and controlling. Sometimes you just need to de-stress a bit. Stop trying to manage everyone into your version of respect."
But this is going back to de-stressing. That's one thing, to actually walk on that balancing beam, smile, joke with your friends. But it's another thing to take a photo there of being carefree and then posting it.
This is the culture we live in. This is what people do.
Yeah, and I think that's a sad sign. But I was there. And one of the first times I was in Auschwitz was a school trip. We were probably around 17. The people in my class were older. And I remember two of the girls just started laughing like crazy. But after a while, you'd realize that it was kind of the nervous laughter. They just basically, they were emotionally overwhelmed, and they just started giggling at everything. They would say something, the other one would start laughing, and they just couldn't control it. But when you heard them and you actually saw them, you could see that this was, the nervous, scared, emotionally overwhelmed kind of laughter, like a coping mechanism, a reaction. They just couldn't stop it. They weren't being disrespectful. They just, they couldn't take it, and this is the way it was coming out. But if they had recorded that and then posted it on YouTube, I would have considered that inappropriate.
So if taking pictures this kind of pictures is bad, what about using phones generally? We know everybody walking through the gate there these days has a phone in their pocket. Or should we not be able to answer phone calls when we're there?
Well, yeah, I think
make phone calls, text.
I mean, what we're kind of getting towards here is this whole issue of the ability to be able to share everything with pretty much the entire world, and the kind of stupid things I did as a teenager that you did, or that we all did as teenagers, where you were when it was pointed out to you, you were incredibly embarrassed, and all the people,
it's like years later you realize what kind of a jerk you were being, Yeah.
Well, not even years. Sometimes at the time, you did something, your entire class, 30 people see you being an asshole, and you kind of did it before you realised, and then you're kind of really embarrassed. But that's like 30 people, and now you kind of do something that seems incredibly amusing at the time. You post it up all over Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and somebody who part of the kind of perpetually or professionally aggrieved kind of notices this and kind of retweets it and sends it on, and before you know it, kind of especially actually if there's a misinterpretation attached to it, as has been the case in some incidents in the United States, but I won't go into.
But with the question of whether or not people should answer the phone or text, it's generally considered socially inappropriate that if you're in a place of worship, or a church, temple, synagogue, mosque, to pick up your phone. It's looked down on you. You're there for a reason.
People Facebook Live their wedding vows these days. I mean, are there any?
A wedding's a little different because that is a celebration.
Okay,
it's
funerals too, probably.
And
nothing is out of bounds anymore. That's the point.
And I think we need to start putting things back in bounds.
Okay, what if we're talking about people using modern technology to do things that are kind of embarrassing, they shouldn't share, the selfies and doing stupid things? What about people who use the technology in a way that we think is acceptable and respectable? I'm sure every day at Auschwitz and Birkenau, every day people Facebook Live, it's a useful tool, they Facebook Live them walking through the gate and their commentary, as their observations and whatnot. Is that okay if they do it in a respectful way?
I believe it is.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
So why is it, if I've got my phone out, and I'm pointing it at myself as I walk through Birkenau, and I'm saying, how special it is to be here and what I feel emotionally and whatnot, that's okay. But if I walk through Auschwitz with my phone on, Facebook Living and saying, yeah, this is so lame, I want to go home and I'm hungry, that's horrible?
Yes, I think you can discern the difference there, right? First of all, I wouldn't say it's completely okay. I would say it's acceptable and understandable if you're sharing this with somebody else. The only problem is, like, when you're pointing that camera at you, you're basically pointing the attention at you. Like, this is all about me and my experience here. And you're sharing that with the world instead of sharing what you're actually experiencing with the rest of the world. I know I'm splitting hairs here, but generally that's more acceptable than somebody complaining about being there, being bored, making jokes. There is a difference, between that and somebody who's taking photos of one of the blocks there because they knew their great grandmother was there, or they have a family member back in Israel who survived the Holocaust.
Technology ruins it. I mean, it's a whole different set
It makes things more complicated.
Everything.
It does.
That's one of the reasons I haven't been there probably 5 or 6 years. And the last time I was there, I was so irritated by people constantly on their phones. When they weren't listening to the tour guide, they were Facebook messaging somebody somewhere. It just drove me crazy. And people forgetting to turn their ringtones off. And it's just I'm more of the I almost want to have a no talking policy there. Not only no pictures, just no talking. Just shut up. That's the way I see things. That's
what I would accept.
I know Grandpa John. Okay, shut up. But I just think it should be quiet and total silence, and just that the phones add a layer of irritation that I just can't take.
Look, if it's socially acceptable that we now have trains where you're not allowed to use your phone or talk, and I think it's even more appropriate for that to be the case in Auschwitz. So I can definitely agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that I have anything against people using it to comment, to share it with people legitimately. But if there was a policy where nothing at all, I would consider that completely understandable as well.
How about an enforced age age limit or age restriction, age minimum.
Well, I don't think the age, as we've kind of established, the age thing is kind of a MacGuffin, really.
Well, it doesn't solve all problems, but do you really need 14? Does any 14-year-old kid, are they ready for this?
Can you ever actually be ready for it? If you're a true, emphasize a human being with, emotions and understanding of the world, can you truly ever be ready to experience something like that? Do you truly want to ever be ready to be able to experience something like that?
Because as I think somebody mentioned, tons and tons of school groups, a lot from the UK, a lot from Germany, of course, and elsewhere, going there. And I understand and I agree with the sentiment. I understand why the high schools want to make that trip. But at the same time, when I look at those kids and they're 14, 15 years old, I don't know if they're really taking much away from it. I don't know if they can, if they can, again, intellectually comprehend what they're looking at, and if their lives are really changed afterward. I just don't know.
Well,
I've seen them too many times. As soon as they get back to town from the Auschwitz trip, they run straight to the mall and spend the rest of the day sitting in the food court and shopping for cheap tennis shoes and whatnot. And these are the people that are supposed to have some kind of deep and meaningful experience when they were at Auschwitz. I don't think so.
Well, on that line, I would say that a lot of my friends, when they come to Krakow to visit, and they tell me that they want to go to Auschwitz as well while they're here, I always suggest to them, do it at the end. Because it will be weird if you show up here on a Thursday, Friday, you go to Auschwitz, and then going out for a beer or clubbing afterwards just doesn't feel right. And I always suggest to them, if you're going to be in Krakow for a short period of time and you really want to go to Auschwitz, make it the last thing you do. It seems appropriate then.
Good advice.
But about talking about like teenagers, they might not understand it or appreciate it when they're there at that time, but youth are generally more impressionable than the rest of us when we get older and cynical. They might not realize it then, but then years down the line, they'll be reading about, they'll be talking about it, and it might come back to them, and then they'll have that experience from years ago when they were in Poland, when they visited the German death camps, and it will start to click in their heads then. At least, that's the hope. Even if it only reaches a small percentage of people, then that's the whole idea. It's like to actually have people remember this, to understand it, to comprehend it.
Yeah, I know. I broadly agree with that. I think that whilst you could be right, John, in the sense of they're not fully appreciating what's there, it is still nevertheless a memory that can be, triggered later on.
Going is better than not going, even if they get very little out of it, I guess.
Yeah, no. I think it's just kind of, as I said, and I think Mike has said, and also, you also, is that there should be some generally understood standards of respect that will be observed in a place like that, similar to the kind of standards of respect that you would observe, say, if you're going to a church or a funeral.
But it's kind of connected to the larger issue of how we don't have social sanctions that really have effect and force. We're living in an age where nobody can tell me what to do, and individual freedom is the highest ideal. But in some situations, we need to accept the fact that you need to submit to the rules that are imposed on a certain area for certain limited purposes.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to interrupt because I think this is really the issue I have with political correctness, in the sense that it's about making rules about this is the way to behave, this is correct, this is not acceptable, this is acceptable. Whereas good old-fashioned courtesy and real respect is not about rules. It's about a common understanding that, like, really, it's just not on to behave in that kind of way. Yes, you can behave in that way, but don't expect to kind of receive respect in return if you're not willing to.
You're free to be an asshole, but don't expect me to like you for it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And on top of that, again, as we said before, Auschwitz is just an absolutely unique set of circumstances that kind of its own rules. The typical rules don't apply. And I'd like to see some more restrictive rules put in place when it comes to people expressing themselves. But again, how do you make that work practically? How do you enforce it? Are you going to kick people out of Auschwitz? Are you going to confiscate their camera? Are you going to prosecute them criminally for taking selfies? It's messy. So people, just behave yourselves when you go there. Well, that's our attempt at trying to shed some light on this complicated subject. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the KrakCast.